Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining Rebekah Taussig and me as we talk about her new book, Sitting Pretty. If you haven't seen it, you will. And after you hear her talk, you will want one for yourself. I want to thank everybody who signed up for our event and who has learned about Ability KC through this event. Tis the season to tell you that we do really kind of amazing stuff as a nonprofit, and we're very important to the community, and we help over 3,000 people in our community. And we also are so interested in having community involvement, having people know who we are and how we fit into the community. If you were interested, our website has all that information about all the different programs we have for every age and every sort of disability. There's the ever-present donate button, so don't forget that. And I want to just bring in Rebekah so she can tell us all about the book and why we were stalker-ish in hunting her down to getting her to help us. I want to first say that my passion for this book has a lot of personal meaning to me. I work in the field, but I also have a child with a rare disease who will be in a wheelchair, so it's important that to me on multiple levels that we can see how our communities and how we support one another in all of this. Our star of the day, of the evening, is Rebekah Taussig, author, mom, wife, educator, all around amazing person. And I know you will feel grateful when getting to hear some of her book. Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body is published by Harper One, and it was released in August of this last year. You can find it everywhere. And the first thing I want you to know is that Rebekah is actually tied to Ability KC, and we found that out without breaking any sort of HIPAA rules, but we didn't know about her in that respect. It's a very beautiful story. So I want her to introduce herself, talk about Ability KC a little bit and how that worked into her life, and then start with her book. So here you go.
Yay, thank you, Nancy. I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you because I adore Ability KC, and I have for all the years that I've been a part of the world of Ability KC. And I am like always looking for opportunities to be able to sing my praises. And when I was like preparing for this conversation and talking with my partner Micah about all that Ability KC has meant to me over the years, like I could not talk about it without crying because this space has become so special to me over the years. I grew up, I mean, I've been disabled since I was about 3 years old, and grew up going to in the doctor's offices and being scanned and treated. And I am so grateful for my doctors in so many ways because they kept me alive and have continued to keep me alive and treat me and my complicated body. But it was a few years ago now that the body that I had known and kind of what I'd gotten used to in my body changed pretty abruptly when I got a new job and was kind of putting my body through more strain than I had in the past, and quickly took on this new level of pain and spasticity in my body that was just unmanageable. And went back to my doctors, and they kind of started playing hot potato with me. Nobody really quite knew what to do, and they were throwing a lot of heavy medications, you know, that I would have to take for life to treat this. And I was just starting to feel truly hopeless and what my life was going to look like with this new incapacitating, unrelenting pain. And one of my doctors actually pointed me towards Ability KC, and I had not heard of you guys before, which is wild. But almost like as soon as I entered that space, it felt so different to me. I felt like my body was just seen differently. And there was this like intimacy and creativity and openness that my body was met with that was new to me. Even just like the fact that my beloved physical therapist, that Katie was the one I met with for the first few weeks. And just like how she learned my body, like she knew my body as well as I knew my body, just like what it was doing and what its patterns were. And that was amazing to me. And the creativity and curiosity that she brought to that, that my body wasn't shocking. It wasn't upsetting. It was just sort of like this thing that we were going to figure out together. And we did, like, we actually did. And, like, how do I talk about that without crying? Because it's just like a game changer to feel that and be in that space. And so I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for Ability KC. And yes, the donate button, like if anybody has the means, I would say like, this is a rare and beautiful space to support. And my dream for 2021, my dream is that more and more of the world would operate like Ability KC does, with that openness, with that creativity, with that imagination, with that care, curiosity and support that I have felt in this space. So to keep myself from blubbering, there's a section in the book that kind of speaks to that time in my life and kind of what brought me to that breaking point, essentially, and kind of brought this new pain into my life. And so I thought I'd read a little bit of that, and so we could kind of look at what even created that scenario to begin with. So this is from the chapter and kind of in the middle of the book called The Price of Your Body. Within 2 months of starting the teaching gig, I developed a searing, burning pain running down my left leg. A few months later, my lower back starts aching and throbbing. A few months after that, my legs start clenching and spasming so severely that eventually I can't unclench them. I try to stand and my left leg jerks backward, my heel pressing into my bum. Eventually, my right leg won't straighten either. As soon as I get into bed each night, my body snaps into the fetal position like a marionette controlled by a force entirely outside of myself. I can't physically pry my body into an easy, relaxed position. When I sit up in the morning, the pain radiating through my lower back and down into my legs takes my breath away. And yet, I feel guilty taking days off. I feel silly writing back pain into the little window on the substitute teacher request form. I picture the badass lady in the office reading the words back pain and chuckling. Yeah, we all have back pain, honey. I picture my dad taking only half a sick day in his 43 years of work. I grew up to believe that only negligent, lazy employees ask for sick days unless they literally can't dress themselves and get to work. Technically, I can get out of bed, get dressed, and out the door. I'm slower and need help to pull up my pants, but this is my new normal. I will show them I'm not a burden. I'm the PH, physically handicapped, with something to offer. I wasn't a bad hire. I will bring more than I take. And like just a quick note about that PH, earlier in the book, I talk about kind of the historical context of in the early 20th century, employees would have a PH kind of stamped to their work forms that indicated physically handicapped, and employers just usually would just pass on that and not even explore, or didn't even matter what that PH meant. It just meant that they weren't eligible to be hired. So I write this like it's something that happened a while ago in the distant past, but this story is still unfolding in real time. Every Monday through Friday, I put on my adult working lady costume. Most days I think I pass. I keep up, manage, do the tasks, sometimes really well even, and have good days. I might be getting a little better at putting in for a sick day, giving 90% to a task that used to take 120% of me. At the same time, my body is constantly reminding me this system was not made for us. My body is exhausted, stretched, strained, worn down by the speed and pace and particular demands of being a full-time working woman. In regular ways, most of us feel, but also in the ways unique to my specific disabilities. I've lost mobility since I started this job. I've developed a cyst between two vertebrae in my lower back that has invited new levels of pain and spasticity in my body. I've put extra levels of strain on my organs. I feel it from my swollen feet to the twitch in my right eye. I've gotten UTIs, started taking more pain meds, and getting steroid injections into my spine to force my body to relent and obey. What a brutal trade-off. I'm torn because being disabled and having any job at all is a gift that defies statistics, that counters the very real lived experiences of so many folks with bodies that don't fit. I don't want to fritter away that gift or express ingratitude for being invited to participate. Nor do I want to suggest that many employers, mine included, wouldn't do whatever is required to accommodate my disabled body. So why don't these special accommodations feel more empowering? Why do they remain so hard to swallow? For starters, there's a contradiction between saying a workplace is inclusive even as it participates in the larger cultural values that celebrate everything a disabled body is not. There's something unsettling about offering accommodations for an exceptional body when the entire system surrounding that body is built on the assumption that more and faster and harder and higher is fundamentally, inherently superior. When you applaud your employees only for arbitrary measurements of work, arriving early, leaving late, never taking sick days or time off, or showing up on the weekend, when you always push for more, production, happy hours, publications, softball teams, cases, meetings, tasks, involvement, spirit, extra, you do not demonstrate an appreciation for those who have a need, who say no, enforce boundaries, or require flexibility. The very stuff of accommodations masked under different names. In some ways, special accommodations insist that our current setup is just fine, thanks. They cling to the idea that only a few outliers can't fit into the mold, ignoring the fact that even those who can make it work might be better off with a more flexible model. The very notion of special accommodations relies on the belief that really there are only a few who don't slip easily into the narrow mold of a 9-to-5 schedule, 5 days a week, clock in, clock out, getting sick only a specific number of times each year, recovering from giving birth and being ready to separate from a newborn baby in a predetermined set of days. So many of us agree to these rules, even as we know we don't thrive there. We're rewarded when we fit tidily into the parameters set before us, so we pretend, mask, and go along with it as best we can. Those who simply cannot fit are highlighted as outsiders who need something extra to make it work, instead of looking at the larger, varied collection of humans on a team and creating a structure that accounts for their real experiences, needs, desires, and motivations. So often, work systems prefer to dispense the smallest portions of flexibility to the ones who simply cannot fake it any longer, or put up the biggest fit and have a lawyer to back them up. I'm glad employers are required by law to dispense those small portions of flexibility. It's an invaluable change. It's also entirely limited by the larger environment, the larger cultural values surrounding work, and the people in charge that houses it. There you are.
There I am. So I think you're speaking to a number of people that would not even necessarily define themselves as disabled. People who may have depression that is medicated, you know, that most of the time works well. And that really speaks to a lot of, a larger bit of the population than I think employers think about. And speaking of, we could go straight into the next big topic. We want to hit them hard right in the beginning. Rebekah, make sure they get it all. And that is to talk a little bit about the word that I think a lot of people don't even know what it means. I think they hear it and they think it's bad, but I think a lot of people couldn't use ableism in a sentence or would understand it. So I really like in your book the way that you help define it for people, much different than they're normally, than they would understand or have heard in the past. So if you want to share with us your view of ableism, everyone would love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's such a huge word. It's such a potentially loaded word. I think people attach things to it. But I think that in the book, I really spend, I mean, there's like 6 pages in the book about like what ableism is and isn't and kind of unpacking it. But I think ultimately what I want to do in the book and defining ableism is to humanize it a little bit more, to not just think about it abstractly, but to think about the human people living underneath ableism. And so the traditional definition of disability, actually, that's actually exactly what the book says. So I'll just read instead of talking more. I forgot that I put that in the book. So this is just the very beginning of the book when I kind of am laying the groundwork and describing some of these big words that we build on throughout the rest of the book. So my definition of ableism is a little different from the one in the Oxford English Dictionary, which simply says discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. Based on my decades of experience and a whole lot of reading of disability studies scholars, I find this definition insufficient. First, it's built on the assumption that there is a distinct category of able-bodied people. While language that makes distinct categories can be useful, you'll sometimes see me use the term non-disabled to illustrate larger patterns. Relying too heavily on this black and white definition of able-bodied is dangerously misleading. It breezes much too easily over the inherent ambiguity built into having a body. Able-bodied invites images of ruddy-cheeked farm boys lifting bricks up ladders. Who are these people? And really, how many of us fit sturdily in this category? The legal definition of disability written in the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act highlights the fact that disability is a far-reaching word that can attach itself to all sorts of bodies, many of them that appear perfectly able or are exceptionally able in one area, but not as much in another. In fact, our ruddy-cheeked farm boy might also have seizures a few times a year, or bipolar disorder, or be somewhere on the autism spectrum. The images that come to mind when we use words like able-bodied are just too one-dimensional to be terribly useful. The Oxford English Dictionary definition also leaves little room for one vital piece of the story. Disability is shaped just as much, if not more, by context than by the body. For example, before spectacles were invented, our population included a much greater number of people categorized as blind. Technology has changed the experience of so many bodies, and as eyeglasses have become integrated into our fashion industry, the stigma around vision that deviates from the ideal 20/20 has shifted. In fact, I've owned a decent number of fake eyeglasses in my day. It's a real thing. We don't tend to equate a person wearing glasses with disability, even if that same person would have been considered disabled in another time and place. And finally, people are often shifting in and out of a disabled state. They break a limb or get the flu or have horrible period cramps or become pregnant or gasp, age, and suddenly they find themselves experiencing disabling limitations. If we live long enough, all of us, without exception, will become disabled. This is a prerequisite to having, living in, being a body. The idea that some of us are firmly fixed in the able-bodied category is a fiction. A world built on speed, productivity, more, and far too few bathrooms and bathroom breaks does not consider or care for the actual bodies we live in. In other words, ableism affects all of us, whether we consider ourselves disabled or not. Because the disabled body is most powerfully affected by ableism, it is the first to cast a light on the structure, to resist and protest it, to call for its public execution. But we're all living under its dictates. Ableism punishes all of us. In its most boiled down, squished together, simplified form, Ableism is the process of favoring, fetishizing, and building the world around a mostly imagined, idealized body, while discriminating against those bodies perceived to move, see, hear, process, operate, look, or need differently from that vision. Often, the greater the deviation, the greater the discrimination. In other words, ableism is one possible answer for a young girl seeing herself as valuable as a princess one week and deflating into shame and self-loathing the next. Thanks for all you do, Oxford English Dictionary, but my definition is better.
And it so is. I think that's an interesting and very helpful way for people to understand how often it happens, how quietly it happens, how it's very often unintentional. And I think part of this whole reason for having you here is so people can start to pay attention to the things they do that are not even clear to themselves, the way they were brought up, or words or comments they heard. So I appreciate that. We had a question about it, and it's kind of an interesting one that says, I'll just read what he wrote. How do we face ableism within the disabled community? Our culture glorifies conquering adversity and overcoming obstacles. Our heroes often are those that have learned to live without the limitation of their disability, and that seems to alienate those who are not able to do the same. How do you work with ableism within your own community?
I think this is such a good question, and in large part because it's so pervasive. I mean, like, I think anyone inside or outside of the disability community can picture what this person is referring to, right? Like the conqueror, the person in a wheelchair on top of a mountain, you know, like the person who has really overcome and found themselves sort of thriving on the other side of this disability. And so it's really pervasive. And I think, honestly, I think in large part, the reason that that is so common is because the disability community has, in a lot of ways, only been given a couple of options of examples of who they can be. There's only a few models, right? And when so much of what I'm interested in is like the stories we tell each other, tell ourselves, and the stories that kind of embed themselves into culture until they become a part of our lived experiences. And disability has like 3 tracks. There's like the inspirational hero. There's the poor suffering victim that we all pity. I mean, maybe there's like the supervillain, you know, like there's not very many options. And so I think in a lot of ways, that stereotypes gets recreated. It's almost like a self-perpetuating problem. Like, we don't have a lot of models, we don't have a lot of examples. And so we kind of feel like if we want to live a exciting, beautiful life, then this is what we have to do. We have to conquer, we have to overcome. And so, you know, like, here I am trying to live a positive, bright life and find myself all fitting into that stereotype again. So to me, I feel like the approach that makes the most sense to me in terms of how we combat that or navigate that isn't necessarily to like go to those people and say like, look at the ableism in you and like, let me teach you how to get away from that. But I think what I hope for is to bring more and more voices and stories of disability into our culture so that, for one, those models are not the only ones we have. Those models become a little bit less powerful because we have more options. We can see other ways of going about life. And there's more nuance and variety and options in that world if we bring more voices in. So maybe, you know, once we have hundreds and hundreds of stories in that collection, and we understand disability as this as nuanced and complicated as any human life, and capable of as many stories as any human life, then maybe there is that, you know, like super crip, as they call them, like that superhero disabled person on top of the mountain. And there's room for that person at that point, because that person isn't the only model we have. That person isn't that picture isn't as powerful if we have more. So that's my hope. I think there, as I say at the beginning of the book, like, there is not one way to be disabled. You know, there's so many ways that we experience this. And I think, you know, if we bring in more stories, maybe there's room for that person. I think, you know, in that way of experiencing your disabled body, there's a way that that can be someone's authentic, true story. It just can't be the only option. It can't be the only way to exist in these bodies of ours.
And I
but
think
I think it's real. It's a good question.
Complicated. And what's really interesting to me is that I think sometimes it's, if you don't live a life where you have friends that are vastly different than you, then your only lens into people that are different than you is usually through social media or through the media, you know, the regular mainstream media, and they don't show regular people. Regular people aren't terribly interesting. They don't make that 2 minutes that they're given at the beginning or the end, or the 1 minute TikTok or whatever it is. And so I think often people are misled about people different than themselves by what they witness in ways that have distorted what that really is. So there are plenty of people who who do amazing things. It's just that some amazing may not be at the top of a mountain.
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Like that the big stories get told and retold, but I don't know. I think in some ways, like, there are disabled people who are doing really interesting things that aren't like conquering their bodies or going to the tops of mountains. And in a lot of ways, it's like, I don't know if, like, as a general public, we're not trained. Like, it's almost like we're trained to look for the inspirational story, you know. We're trained to want to see that person as like overcoming their body, and so a lot of times I feel like that story gets picked up. Like, there might be a story that's more ordinary, and it gets picked up into like something that's inspirational when maybe it's not. Like, I've heard a lot of people, and I've experienced this a little bit myself, talk about something as ordinary as like going to the grocery store and doing something that's really routine, and then having people like applaud that, like it's this amazing thing, and you're like, okay, but I'm actually just doing something normal right now, so let's reserve the applause for like truly applause worthy feats, you know. Like, it's interesting how powerful those stories become.
Well, and I do think that sometimes it's because the people that are applauding think they couldn't do that ordinary feat with the situation that you're given. So their goal is not to say you pat on the head, but actually is their own reflection of their inability to imagine life without all of, well, with their with them being not even able to admit or announce their own less than perfect situations, but by saying, if I had these other things to overcome, I don't know if I could. So it is very complicated, because the intent is never, I don't believe in human nature to patronize or to, you know, make anyone feel badly. It's just it's how little we think before we do or say.
Yes, and I think it just shows like how deeply embedded, you know, and like behind good intentions some of these ideas are.
Absolutely. Well, we won't spend the whole time talking about that. We'll probably get back to it. One of the readings that we're going to do is just an interesting tie into Ability KC, is that we were started by a lovely woman named Vivian Shepard, at least the medical rehab side. We do have another side started by another wonderful woman in 1947, but the medical rehab side was started to work with soldiers coming back from World War II who needed rehab and needed jobs. And so that's how long Ability KC has been around, which is quite amazing when you get upwards of 70, almost 75 years, is that there were people who were facing disabilities or different abilities after war, and they needed to come back and still succeed and participate in the community. And you talk about that being one of the first times that these things were addressed. And if you would please read a little bit about that.
Yes. Okay. So this is in the chapter, What I Mean When I Talk About Accessibility. Conversations about access for disabled folks didn't even start in the United States until disabled World War II vets demanded job training and rehabilitation after their return. It wasn't until 1973 that we passed the first piece of legislation that said, yes, you too. We think disabled folks deserve to exist here too. Accommodations for disabled people aren't special, at least not any more special than the world of accommodations already surrounding us. It's just that typically those who already have access haven't had to think about who is still waiting to be included. And yet, when we consider disabled bodies as a vital part of the larger group, all of us benefit. When curb cuts were originally designed, the idea was to create accommodations for wheelchair users. Prompted by the smallest whiff of creative innovation, curb cuts were imagined into being as alternate options for interacting with our physical spaces. And suddenly, wheelchair users were granted access to more of their own neighborhoods and public spaces. But something else happened too. Parents pushing strollers found trips around the block a bit easier. And so did people on bikes and scooters, people rolling luggage, vendors with food carts, people in pain who needed to take smaller, more gradual steps. Closed captioning provides those with hearing impairments a way to access the stories and news delivered through their screens, but it also allows everyone the chance to connect with videos, even when they need to turn the sound off on their device or can't understand a mumbler. The medical model of disability, the default setting that sees individual broken bodies in need of individual solutions, misses so many opportunities to imagine a more flexible, accessible, inclusive, inviting world for all of us. What innovations might be made to medicine if disabled bodies were seen as conduits for innovation? What possibilities for play are we missing on our playgrounds? What practices might we adopt in our educational systems to facilitate more flexible, more meaningful learning for more students? What ways of being in the world might surface if we were able to lift the stigma clinging so tightly to the disabled body? What would happen if we decided disabled bodies were worth including?
I keep muting myself so I will not make wiggly noises while you're in there, while you're talking, and then I forget to unmute, so my apologies. I think one thing that always comes to mind when we do this is talking about how, you know, how few, we talk about how people don't see as many disabled people as they should, or they aren't aware or cognizant because their disability isn't obvious. Accessibility generally is thought of to be people with physical disabilities. But one of the things that you said that makes me think about this at the time with accessibility is how many people don't even venture far from their comfort zone because of that fear of accessibility, that they don't want to put themselves in that situation. And so I think we see that a lot here, and you see that with people that you know who just decide that, you know, they won't go. There's a commercial right now about a girl who has acne, who doesn't want to go outside and doesn't want to do anything. And so it always makes me wonder if people that are disabled that have chosen not to have reduced the number of seen, therefore people are more inspirational. In other words, it stops being part of our regular world. So what are your thoughts on how we rectify that?
That's a really, really good point. The idea that disabled people are not in, like, it's more difficult to be involved in the community because of access. And so they are in public less often, in public doing regular things less often. And then we have sort of these token, big, exciting, inspirational stories about disabled people. Or, you know, it's also the stories, like the inspiration porn stories, about, you know, the moment that one non-disabled person was kind to a disabled person. The football star, what are they called? Quarterbacks? I don't know. I don't know as much about sports, you guys. But the football star,
always good. Yeah.
yeah, right. I figured. The football star that like asked the disabled girl to prom, or, you know, and everybody is like crying and applauding, and it's a news story somehow. Or the in the book, I actually write about a story that went mega viral. There was a man, deaf and mute man, on an airplane, and they didn't have any way to communicate with him on this plane, and so they like asked on a loudspeaker for someone who knew American Sign Language, and there was a young woman on the plane who did, and so she kind of finger signed into his palm, and they communicated that way over the course of the flight, and the whole world went wild about this story. Some woman on the plane took pictures of it and posted it to her Facebook account, and then like literally all of these big news platforms were like picking that up as a story. And so we have like these big, larger than life, like sensationalized versions of disability out in the world from these news stories. And like the thing to think about is like who is at the center of those stories, and who, what is the story that we're really trying to tell here, and who does it serve? And so a lot of times, yeah, I think all of the time in stories like that, in these inspiration porn stories, we have the non-disabled person as the hero, as the star, as the person whose perspective we're looking through. And that really reinforces a lot of what we're talking about with ableism, with thinking about disabled people as kind of like secondary characters, as the side characters are here to kind of prop up and boost the important people in the story. And part of what becomes problematic about that, or troubling or punishing about that, is we just don't hear from disabled people what they actually need, what is actually helpful, what is that, like, what did that man on the flight actually need in that scenario, and what is he going to need the next time he goes on a plane? You know, like, what's the plan? Are we always going to just hope that there's a beautiful young woman on the plane who can like finger sign into his palm? So it just leaves so much unaddressed, and kind of continues to bolster and celebrate these one-off encounters of kindness, without addressing anything. So now, Nancy, I feel like I've forgotten your original question.
No, this is it, because what I really want to talk about is, you know, you said, what do we do about, does that change what the airline does when they'll happily take your, you know, your money, but not so much have an answer or a plan, except literally the hope that not only do you get lucky enough to have someone who can do the communicating or help with the situation, but that you look like a great airline for not having a solution to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the most heartbreaking parts about that story, because I, like, when I first found it, I did a lot of digging, and I was like, I want to like find everything that's been written or shared about this story. And it was actually on some news stations, like TV news stations, and they had this interview with the man, and I'm not going to remember exactly what he said, but he communicated something about how much it meant to him that this young woman like reached out to him, like they had like that connection on the flight. And he said something about how like he was much more used to being alone or loneliness. And to me, I'm like, that's a story. That's what we should be looking at. Like, why, like, what about social isolation for disabled people? And like, oh my gosh, like, why would it, what does it mean that this man goes through the world expecting people to not interact with him, or not, or expecting to be alone? And so, and what can we do about that? And what can we do about flights that, that are just kind of recklessly flying through the air without a plan for this man showing up? And we've, you know, we've had some time to figure it out. Plans have been around for a long time. Like, let's disabled people have also been traveling for a long time, so let's address that now. I think that's one of the most damning things about stories like that. And I say that knowing that we love stories like that because they make us feel good, and the world is full of terrible news, and why wouldn't we want that news that makes us feel warm and bright and hopeful for the future? You know, like, it feels hard to let go of that and say that there's something wrong with stories like that, right? Because we love them. Clearly we love them. They go viral all the time. But I think that it's harder to see and recognize the actual damage that's being done with that. And when we've been trained to look in the perspective of the non-disabled person for so long, that's the natural or normal or default perspective that we're used to sitting in. I think a lot of times it doesn't occur to us to think about or ask or question or consider what that non-disabled person is feeling or experiencing, or what glaring problem is actually under the surface of the story itself. Why is it worth going to the news when a non-disabled person asks a disabled person to a dance? That's a problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is, again, we look at people with disabilities as an outlier, because when we design, when we make, when we build, how much attention are people with disabilities even considered? Or is it considered that we make it better one at a time, as opposed to making it better in general? We make it better for someone with a disability as needed. It's a PRN solution, to using medical terms, for what we're facing. And that kind of leads into the next thing, which is how we even found you. When I said in the beginning, the group of us in marketing and development, which, you know, obviously is to make Ability KC better known and to kind of bring the community in, doesn't always know about patients that are coming to us, because it's medical information is need to know, right? So you were my boss's idea after she saw you on Cup of Joe. And Cup of Joe is a blog about moms and parenting and travel and relationships and food and all good things. And they did a spread of different people's different outfits and their cool aesthetic, as my daughter would say. And when she noticed that you had an Instagram page, went to the Instagram page, found out you're from Kansas City, and all of a sudden said, there's no way we don't know her. And so from there, we found you. But what brought her the most joy, and what brought her to you and then all of us, is your love of things that don't often get paired with people with disability, which is, oh, I don't know, flair and design and things that matter. And oftentimes we don't think of that. So I would love for you to read a little bit of your book when you talk about sort of the clash of design and access.
Yes, yes, the pretty things, right? The beauty, I love it, the aesthetic. Yeah, this is in the chapter about accessibility as well. And it's kind of coming off of a longer section where I'm talking about finding a house, finding a home, which I'm lucky enough to be in right now. Like, you can see my home. It's got colors and books and yeah. So it was very difficult for me to find a home, and part of the search was just needing it to be accessible, right? Like, that is the bare minimum. Like, I need to be able to get in the door. But there was also, and I need to be able to afford it. I need to be able to pay for it, which was just an almost impossible combination of qualifications, turns out. But then there's also this part of me that wants to live in a home that is beautiful, you know, that has charm and has isn't just like sterile slabs of concrete. So no more talking. I'll just read you this section of the book. And Micah is my partner. So Micah bumped me up the front steps and through one of the 2 front doors. I took one look around and my heart swooned. Home. The landlord told me the house was built in 1895. All of the doorknobs were wobbly and cracks were creeping up the walls and across the ceilings. It had a farmhouse kitchen sink, a freestanding clawfoot tub, and plenty of unexpected quirks like the extra front door and ancient knobs on the vents and locks. I eyed the bathroom, and although I couldn't fit my chair through the door, the landlord said he'd throw up a few handrails. I could picture myself sitting on the edge of the tub while I brushed my teeth at the sink. The real miracle was the washer and dryer located on the main level. In my previous house, as in most old houses, the laundry unit was located in the basement. So I'd been taking giant piles of dirty clothes over to my parents' house every other week for ages. I mean, like almost a decade of my adult life. A washer and dryer I could access in my own home. It was a palace. A few weeks later, I moved in and set to work making it my own. Based on the design and overwhelming lack of flair breathed into the vast majority of tools and spaces deemed accessible, I imagine it's assumed that disabled folks don't really have taste. If you need access, surely the desire for style has been canceled out. Accessibility must necessarily be the sole, all-consuming #1 priority, erasing any other possible preference or desire. Beggars can't be choosers and all of that. You'll take the glaring metal bars, cement walls, and brown Velcro, and you'll be grateful. Of course, functionality is important. You might even say vital. I can't live somewhere that I can't get into. But I'm also a person with very specific preferences about floors and lighting, wall color, and door frames in my home. I don't want just a shelter I can enter and survive in. I want a space that feels like home. Don't you?
And the answer is yes. One of the things that you write on Sitting Pretty on Instagram is just mini memoirs. And one of our listeners noted, read, and asked about a story that you wrote about trying to get your hair done at a salon, which kind of crosses all of those things too, which is your desire for chic and happening at the same time being accessible. But it brought up a whole different kind of thing that we get back to, which is what happened when you went. So if you don't mind just talking a little bit about what happened when you went to get your haircut and how that ended.
I just love that. I loved that question because I just loved that somebody remembered that post. It was like from a few, like, I don't know, this summer. I think I wrote about that in the summer, and like it's just so lovely that anybody read that and remembered it. Also, I have to have you all admire. I have not been to the hairdresser in like a year. I don't know, pandemic time, but Micah is the one who cut my hair last. So
well,
he was terrified and like practically cried the whole time, and I was like, no, you have to cut my hair. So anyways, one day I will get back to the hairdresser, the professional, and this story was about when I was trying to find a new hairdresser in Kansas City, and I had spent, you know, like I did my Google searching. I found like a list of places that looked like they might be interesting, and then I spent, you know, like, I don't know, 4 hours on Google Earth, like trying to assess, like, what does that entrance look like? And is there a place for me to park? And, you know, none of the websites talked about access at all. That wasn't something that was like listed on the website. And so I'm just like trying to deduce this for myself and, you know, figure out it, like, what's this space like? Can I get my chair in there? And where there be room for me to transfer? And I found one finally that I was like, I like this place. I like what they're doing. And I think I can get inside, and I think I can navigate the space inside. And it wasn't like a perfect setup, like it was street parking, which isn't scary for me, but I was like, I found something that I think I can make work. And I got there, and I'm like rushing up to the doors, and I go to open them, and what in the picture, what had looked like one giant door on this very cool old hip building was two very narrow doors, and one of them was locked. And so I'm like sticking my head in this lobby, and it's like very peaceful and serene inside, and everybody's very chill and beautiful. And I'm like trying to get someone's attention by also being calm and beautiful, which does not work very well. And so I'm like, hello, you know, like trying, and I'm like frantic and panicked, and I'm feeling like I'm like messing up the aesthetic of this beautiful place with my like frantic energy. And I'm like trained as someone who's grown up as a disabled person to like feel like a burden immediately as soon as like I'm calling attention and someone has to come fix something for me. And so I'm like, my energy is, and my heart is pounding. And this very peaceful young woman comes slowly up to the door, and she's like, oh, don't worry about it. No problem. Like, she's graciously forgiving me essentially for this problem that I've caused. And I knew, like, in the moment, I just like felt uncomfortable, and I felt even a little bit more ashamed than I did even before. And it was only after, in retrospect, that I realized, like, what would it have felt like for her to like apologize for the fact that their door was set up like this? Like, not only for me, but like for anyone with wider hips, for anyone carrying a big handbag. Like, this was a really foolish setup for their building, and didn't have a lot of foresight. And maybe it would have been, you know, it would have shifted things for both of us, I think, had she recognized that they'd actually created that problem before I had even arrived. But instead, her response of like forgiving me for the spectacle that I'd created was to reinforce that actually the disabled person showing up to this public space had created a problem to begin with, that she graciously forgave. I don't think she even thought about that. I think that it was just sort of the impulse response, and I think she was also trying to be gracious. But it just is not, again, to go back to this idea that this system is deeply embedded in the way that we think about and respond in the moment in the world, that we are kind of trained to think of our spaces as fine and people who don't fit into our spaces as the problem, as opposed to we could create these spaces differently. So yeah, that's the story that they were talking about.
That they found out about. And you know, I wanted to, as kind of bring up, and you mentioned in the book, a moment when someone, I'm always surprised sometimes at gumption, at whether they know they're being what they're being. And what I mean is, it's happened to my son and I know it happened to you, where someone decided they were going to heal you with some laying on of hands or some prayer that you neither requested nor encouraged. And it happened to us in a airport, where someone out of the clear blue decided this was something that needed to happen for us. Very confusing for my son. And I just wonder about why it feels like the people who ought to be more insistent on the world becoming more accessible for them are the quietest often, the ones that will change what they're doing so as not to upset the status quo, versus people who find it perfectly reasonable to stick themselves where they do not belong. And I know you talk a little bit about shame, and I'm always just interested in how that balance got unbalanced.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's definitely imbalanced, right? Like, it's definitely, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, it's so strange that people feel like they have permission, that is not, like that there's nothing in place to cause a person to feel a check, like
Right.
there's not a check there, that there is sort of a green light for that kind of behavior. And I think part of it is just a setup or a system and a world in which really, I mean, I hope I'm not sounding redundant or repetitive here, but like really we have set up this whole picture to believe and reinforce the idea that this person is a problem, this person is broken and needs fixing, and they must want that, and they must, and how can me offering that be anything other than kind? And we know that kindness is always good, and so I think that setup dynamic reinforces the permission that people feel to offer that kindness. I also think that on the other side of it, the people who are like advocating and pushing for change in access, that's an uphill battle. That's a difficult thing to do. Especially when you look at that in contrast to like, oh, I could extend kindness to this one individual person in front of me and feel good about it, So it's like, this option is easy and feels good, and this option is difficult and hard and maybe doesn't always feel good because it's maybe you're reaching a lot of bad feedback, maybe people don't respond well to that, and maybe there are a lot of hurdles to that. And so I think the contrast between those two things, the ease and the pleasant feelings versus the difficult road, and the potential pushback, and reinforces this. I think what I would like to see, and I think already, I wonder if this is already happening a little bit, is that there would start to be some checks in place for people so that it wouldn't actually feel good anymore, that it would actually, there'd be some accountability, there'd be some pushback, and reminders and catches and checks in place to remind people or show people that is not an okay thing to do. And I think if we spend just a moment talking to people who have received those kinds of prayers, who've received those, attempts at kindness, I think we can understand how that actually feels.
Well, I think we've been taught to be kind back, and so we don't stop them, number one, because it hits you, you're stunned anyone would do that, and then you're not quite sure how to sweetly say, please go away, what you're offering is not welcome here, because then they look at you as if you are somehow the bad guy. So
yes,
it's easier to take it than to argue about it.
Yes, because in the scenario, in that story that has already been written, they are the kind person and now you're the mean person. And you're not a mean person, so you don't want to be the mean person, So you're being put in that position of either accepting something and receiving something that feels bad, that makes you feel small, right, or being the mean person in the room.
Right.
Take your pick. What do you want to be?
It's very complicated. But I will say what's interesting about what you said before, it is easier to just get one good, give one nice gift to a poor child at the holidays and you get to live on that. Working in nonprofits, very often that is, people love to do things without leaving the couch. So if they can feed a kitten or help someone at Shriners or hospital or whatever it is, they can get their feel good with never really having to do much at all, especially not, God forbid, speak to one. Or adopt a kitten or whatever it is. Now, not everyone at all. But what I find interesting is when you say otherwise you're fighting against a large organization situation that doesn't seem to want to move. And we talked a little bit, I know you and I have, about even the medical field doesn't, the people who ought to understand disability better than anyone, even do their setup in ways that are not accessible to people, that there are people that come here to get weighed because they can't get weighed at their PCP and haven't been weighed in 6 years, or haven't had proper preventative care because of their disability, whether they're in a chair or whether they can't get a mammogram or they can't get, any of those tests because the medical establishment doesn't even make their own spaces comfortable, even accessible, let alone comfortable. And that's something that I think people think if I can't even get those people to understand it, we had a lady who said she had a doctor who couldn't believe that a gynecological exam couldn't be and said, I'm building my own. I will make sure it is. I can't believe I haven't in all these years. So you're really fighting a huge monolith.
Yeah, and that's I mean, like doctors' offices, and then I remember I think this was 2017. Activists fought so hard for the ADA. I mean, like the work that those folks did to make that happen, to push that legislation through, was ridiculous.
Everyone should watch Crip Camp. If they're sitting at home on Netflix, watch Crip Camp.
Or and read Judy Heumann's book. This is another.
Amazing.
Judy Heumann is a huge person in making the ADA happen. But then, so you think about, we got through that hurdle, and then it was in 2017 when there were two senators who dreamed up this new legislation that was like basically undoing a lot of the good work that the ADA did, that was putting more of the responsibility on the disabled people who were already being pushed out to also fight harder to get brought back in. And it almost like it like made progress. Like it wasn't until Tammy Duckworth, who was also a disabled woman, brought in and kind of fought back to hold that in place from becoming actual past legislation. I mean, that was in 2017. Like it's exhausting to think that you pushed that hard and you finally make progress, and then we're still fighting just to hold on to what we have, let alone make additional progress. And so, yes, I think it is a hard battle. It's a hard battle to fight, and to continue to hold on to and fight. And so there are things that the easier things, the one moment of pleasant friendliness feels good, and then there's this other thing that's much harder and more complicated and unwieldy. Yeah.
Kind of amazing. I want you to talk about your hope for the book. I know that always, few authors are not sure what to do with that question. Either it makes them happy or makes them, but tell us what you want to happen with your book, and what do you see as your vision for what it could do?
I think, so my first gut response when asked about the hopes that I have for this book is I just can't believe it exists at all, and I can't believe anyone's reading it, and how would I hope for anything more than just the fact that it exists and that it's in your hands. But I do think that if I were to really lean into hope and dream big and think about possibilities, I hope that this book does the work to shift people's perspectives and push the ticker a little bit forward. When we talk about how hard we've fought and people before us have fought for the progress we have already, I hope that this book does a little bit more work to make that easier, make that fight easier, to make progress, so that we can look at the world different and kind of make a more accessible future for each other. I hope that this book makes people want to read more books and seek out more stories and more perspectives from disabled people, because I can't say it enough, this is one of millions of perspectives and stories. So I hope that the book transforms us. I hope that the book brings more voices in. I hope it makes the world, I know I'm getting really big dreams here, but let's do it, because why not? I hope that it changes us I hope it makes a kinder world for the people coming up next, you know? That's what I hope.
Well, I think you are on the right track. And if I have anything to say about it, as I've told you, Christmas was easy. Everybody's getting one. And I want you to read a little bit about your summarization of sort of that thought, which is just your roadmap, what you're hoping will happen.
Can you remind me of what page we're talking about, Nancy?
154.
154. Oh yes. Oh yes.
All
Oh yes.
your sweat and guts into this thing, and what do you feel like you're accomplishing? I love this part.
Yeah, well, because like I was saying, the initial hope is like, oh, I can't believe that someone's reading my book, that my book, like anyone wants to read this story. But I think that the point of this book and the point of the big dreams is like, it's not just about me and it's not just about this book. Here we are. This is in the feminist pool party chapter. And it's coming off of a conversation where I'm kind of grappling with that very idea that this is not just about me, this is about a community of people. And in that tiny moment, I can see all of us growing up across the planet, trying to figure out the world around us with these bodies of ours that don't quite fit. I see us as little kids getting overwhelmed at birthday parties, at the dinner table with families that don't quite get it, flipping through magazines on our beds, scouring the pages for even one picture that looks a little like us, going to our first school dances and dancing alone in our rooms, making cautious dreams and staying up late at night trying to solve the impossible puzzle of independence, recklessly navigating our first experiences with love and sex and friendship because we haven't been given one goddamn roadmap. Suddenly, I do see it. I'm not raising my hand for me. There's a big, beautiful population of folks who deserve to be included too. And raising my hand for us feels different. Suddenly, I feel validation and urgency behind this conversation.
And that pretty much sums up what we've been talking about, which is that how many stories there are and how great it is to hear every story and how all of those stories hopefully combine for something better. We did have a question that said, from someone who I know you touched, that simply said, how do I get involved and what can someone do to be more inclusive as a future healthcare provider? I'm seeing the same feeling shared by different groups of people. It's the story that is different. How can I be a better person?
So I obviously, just like who I am and what I value in life, I have my biases. And I feel like I really believe that stories are one of the most powerful forces in the world. I think stories are the things that transform us. When we are able to enter into another person's story and be in their perspective and let that wash over us, I think we see the world differently afterward. I really believe that. I've experienced that myself, and that is what I hope my book and all of these stories do for us. So I would say to that person, and I love that people in the medical world are wanting to do that work, that they want to do better, participate in making those changes that we crave and need. And I would say seek out stories. I think seeking out the actual human stories behind the ideas we're talking about, so that it's not a matter of like memorizing a set of rules, but it's about getting to know a group of people, a very nuanced, complicated, gorgeous group of people. I think that is, it might be it might be a slower transformation. It might be a little bit harder than just like a list of rules and a set of terms to use and not use. But I think that kind of transformation, like that kind of work, is lasting and deep and transformative. Not to say that lists of rules and terms to use and not use aren't useful. I'm just not very good at that. And I'm simplifying things at that point. I think that there are other books like that can help with that kind of work, and that's important too. But I really do think that really sitting in the stories of other people is the thing that helps us, that transforms our thinking, that changes the way we see the world, that changes our ability to imagine what we could do differently. So that's what I would say. I would say seek out those voices, immerse yourself in those stories until they change you.
And I think that's also when, you know, a focus group of different people, if you're building something or if you're designing something, you know, my fear is always for people that are numbers people or they need data. And there are certainly those people. I am not one. I do not believe you are one. But for those people who want to make changes on a larger scale in the city, with our new airport, with the streetcar, although stories are good, there are times that I think you have to do both, which is to say that there are a lot of us and my one story is only mine, but it certainly can be echoed X number per capita at the same time. Because we talked a little bit about, if you build it accessible, people will, of all different situations, will use it because accessible is universal. So I agree. Do you have thoughts on the larger sort of how you manage to make stories also work for the bean counters?
Yes, stories. And I think that's such a good point, Nancy. And that's why I'm saying, like, I have a very heavy leaning, but I appreciate like being brought back to some of the, like, I don't know, more practical ways of thinking about it. But I guess when I say stories, it's voices, right? It's like the actual people and spending time with the actual people. So I think that's exactly right. Like, bring them to the focus group, bring them to the meetings, bring them onto your team. Because I really believe, you know, universal design is the term, but I think what that is in my mind is like bringing the disabled person into the planning, into your mind when you're building that space. Suddenly, when you bring that voice in, it opens it up for everyone. That's the design that opens things up for everyone. So I love that idea. Yes. Bringing those voices into your world, into your teams, into a focus group. When I was really young, like when I was like dreaming of what I wanted to be when I grew up, I mean, there were many things on my list, but one of them was I just had this vision of like being the person that someone would hire to come into their building and tell them all the things, you know, that like I couldn't access. Like that was a dream of mine. I would show them like which direction the bathroom doors should open and close. And I would tell them like what happens when I try to wash my hands in their sink and water drips down my arms. You know, like I just had this vision you know, as I got older, I started to laugh at that. And then as I got even older, I was like, yes, that should be a job. Bring that person in.
And in all honesty, it's happening more and more. I will give you that people are saying, why can't a sink fit more people than the ones? And this brings me to your comment that I always try to make you say, which is that a room is as accessible as you want to make it, and that everything in a room is there for some sort of accessibility, but that we stop when the people we want in the room are there.
Yes.
So
yes.
Speak about that a little bit.
Yes, we act like this is like, it's like we don't realize or think about that literally everything that is built around us, everything that is built, everything that is sewn, everything that is designed and constructed is built to accommodate some human body. The clothes that you wear, the cups that you pick up and drink out of, the mattress that you sleep on, the doorknobs that you use to open your doors and cabinets, everything has been designed with thinking about how to make something easier or to accommodate a limitation that a human body has. So what happens though is that we create a design with maybe a certain body in mind, and then everyone we think and expect to show up to the place and use it is doing it. And so we don't continue to fiddle with or tweak or redesign that to accommodate more human people, because we're satisfied. We're satisfied with the way that doorknob turns. The people that we want to be able to turn it can turn it. So let's leave it there. When there are other ways that doors can open, there are other ways we can be sheltered. There are other ways that we can get clothes on and off. But we tend to stop imagining and revising when we're satisfied, that the people who need to put clothes on their bodies can do it. And so I think we forget that. We tend to think that, we forget that like everything around us is some kind of accommodation.
Well, I find it interesting because I want to know, you know, one of the coolest things ever recently has been how to open the hatch of a car with your foot. Like the wave of your foot under the hatch of some of these new cars will automatically open the hatch, because no one can carry their keys and 45 bags of groceries and a kid and their purse. And so it's literally just the wave of a foot now that will open the back. And I wonder if it's busy moms, like who is their focus? Because that can also help someone in a wheelchair, someone who's got a child in a, you know, there's so many people that becomes helpful to, not to have a key or a fob or something else. So I think there are some industries that get there accidentally, and whether they're meaning to serve the disabled or whether that's not even their focus, but it does work. I think the way design is headed is in a good direction. Whether they meant to do it, you know, I don't know who they were waiting to get in the room, but I think they're making some headway.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't aware of the hatch thing, but like, trash cans is the one I've noticed lately. Like so many trash cans, you have to put your foot on a lever, and I'm always like trying to do it with my hand and get the thing in the trash at the same time, and it's just gross. But there's new ones you just wave over, and anyways.
And faucets that you don't have to touch.
Yes.
And that all came from germs, but it helps if you don't have that. Yeah. So I think there are lots of things that are happening that's pretty exciting. I think there probably are jobs where they bring people in and say, what would be helpful? So
hire me.
Hire Rebekah. She's ready to go. Sadly, the last part that I want to talk about is just to talk about what happened after this book went to bed, so to speak, and explain a little bit about the 2020 irony that, you know, that all came about all at the same time, and read what you've been through with this baby of yours.
Oh my gosh, it is ridiculous. I mean, it's been a year for all of us, right? But it was less than 24 hours after I submitted the final manuscript for this book. I was very surprised to find out that I was pregnant. And I like always joke with people like, I mean, we weren't surprised because we didn't know how babies are made, because we did. I just did not realize until we were pregnant how little I expected to be able to conceive. And I didn't have a lot of information about how my body would respond to like carrying a baby, but it was very shocking to us to find out less than 24 hours after this book was finished being written. And then that was a Tuesday, and it was the next Tuesday that we found out that my partner Micah had cancer, which honestly was even more shocking and 10 times more devastating. It was that like totally flipped the whole planet. And so he was going through treatments and surgeries, and that was when this bit is the part that everyone remembers, is when COVID kind of swept the globe. And so I was pregnant, trying to figure out like how I was going to bring a baby into a pandemic, and so everything changed after this book was finally, you know, the last word was written. Like everything for everyone changed. Everything in my world, personally and globally, changed. And so it was like, what do we do with this now? And I think it's interesting. I think that a lot of the ideas in this book are almost even more relevant now, or like, you know, it's like a lot of these issues are coming up to the surface, and we're all kind of looking at them in a new way. But anyways, yeah, that all happened. And then my book was kind of trailing behind, like, I'm still here, I'm coming down the pike. So yeah, let me just read a little bit of the postscript here. Okay. At the very same time, the virus has brought to the forefront the inherent frailties that come with living in a body, whether everyone acknowledges it or not. Almost overnight, workplaces made themselves more flexible, more accessible. They created accommodations previously pitched as impossible. A giant portion of the American population suddenly found themselves uninsured simply because a force entirely outside of their control decimated our economy. Hospital policymakers have grappled with whose lives to prioritize in their overcrowded floors, often revealing some of the ugliest ableist beliefs humans still hold close. As I type these words, my restless baby kicks and punches and rolls against my forearms, reminding me he's coming to live in this world with us, and soon. I have multiple tabs open on my computer where I compulsively check the latest numbers of diagnoses and deaths. My swollen feet are propped up on a giant tub Micah scooted under my desk. Like so many of our bodies these days, mine is strained and hanging on. And as I get ready for the birth of both my babies, my human and book, I feel an added urgency behind the words I've gathered here. Things are changing fast, and bringing the disabled body to the center of the conversation can only add much needed, hard-earned insight, nuance, and practicality to the reimagining required of us. Insights like sorting bodies into a hierarchy of those worth saving is an arbitrary and dangerous practice. Health insurance should never be dependent on employment. Collective collaboration will carry us so much further than individual pursuits. It's not that disabled people have all the answers to the problems unfolding around us. Good Lord, who does? But if ever there was a time to invite us to the figurative, social distanced version of the table, I'd say we've arrived.
I think you ended well in your preface. I think you summed up an entire flipper switch. And I do want people to know that Micah is with the baby somewhere.
Yes, thank you. I always forget.
Like, you're not alone in that house.
He's doing well. I mean, like, we're having this conversation because Micah is doing well and watching Otto, the very loud teething 6-month-old baby.
Yes, I didn't want that to end on, now everyone should worry more. I appreciate so much. I want you to know that there were a couple of things that were said at the very end, and that people have said that they read your book and they think it should be required reading for high school and college. And then our CEO just said that it's an incredibly valuable conversation, and she appreciates you spending some time with us, allowing us to introduce you to more people and to most of our staff, many of whom just can't talk enough about you. And most entertaining is trying to watch them not hug. Yeah, with all of that. So the last thing I want to mention, only because of our love, is that there are some awesome stickers that I want to get out to you to get to people that we have made with quotes from your book. So for people that are interested that see this, they can look for those soon to be on a street corner, a COVID protected street corner, or just everywhere in the world once COVID's over, so we can get those out. We will be selling them internally for our staff and our patients that are here, but we can't let anyone else in. So for safety's sake, but I cannot thank you enough for the time that you've taken, for sharing of yourself and your time multiple times because of my technologically challenged world, for just being the ray of sunshine that you are. And I look forward to spending more time with you. And I would clap and cheer, but it looks silly when it's just me. Yay you. Yay you. Thank you so much, Rebekah. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will be in touch.
I love you, Nancy, and I love you, Ability KC, and take care, everyone.